The war had lasted 40 years, and millions had died on both sides, leaving entire worlds as nothing but ash and memory. Princess Lyran Veth stood at the great window of her father's throne room, watching the warships drift past the orbital stations like silver fish swimming through an endless black ocean. She was the third daughter of Emperor Kalen Veth, ruler of the Valorian Empire, and she had grown up knowing nothing but conflict. Nothing but the endless reports of battles won and lost, of soldiers who left and never returned. Today, however, something was different. The Galactic Confederation had sent an offer of peace, but not just any peace. They proposed a marriage alliance, a union between a Valorian noble and a human representative. The humans were the newest members of the Confederation, a strange species from a harsh world called Earth. The Valorians had fought against them for only 5 years, but in that short time, the humans had proven themselves to be surprisingly resilient enemies. "You cannot be serious," her eldest sister Valeth had said when Lyran volunteered for the marriage. "You would wed yourself to one of those primitives? Those creatures from that death world?" But Lyran had made her decision. Someone had to sacrifice for peace, and she would rather it be her than watch another generation grow up surrounded by war. Her father had looked at her with sad eyes, but he had not refused her offer. He was tired too, tired of sending young Valorians to die in the cold vacuum of space. 3 months later, Lyran stood in the ceremonial hall of Axis Prime, a massive space station that served as neutral ground for all the species of the galaxy. She wore the traditional silver robes of a Valorian bride, her pale blue skin adorned with patterns of white paint that told the story of her ancestors. Her 4 eyes, too large and too small, scanned the crowd of diplomats and officials who had gathered to witness this historic moment. And then she saw him. Daniel Carter walked down the central aisle with a calm that seemed out of place. He was shorter than she expected, standing only slightly taller than her own modest height. His skin was a warm brown color, his hair dark and cut short, his eyes a deep shade of brown that reminded her of polished wood. He wore a simple black suit with no decorations, no medals, no symbols of rank or achievement. The Valorian nobles whispered among themselves, their disappointment clear. They had expected a warrior, a giant from the death world, someone who would at least look impressive. Instead, they saw a quiet man who smiled gently as he approached the altar. Lyran felt her heart sink. This was the human who was supposed to help bring peace? This ordinary, unremarkable creature? The ceremony began, and the officiating priest spoke the ancient words of union. Lyran recited her vows in a clear voice, promising to honor the alliance between their peoples, to work toward understanding, to build bridges where there had been walls. She spoke with dignity, but her words were hollow, driven by duty rather than feeling. Then Daniel spoke his vows, and something unexpected happened. His voice was soft but steady, and he looked directly into her eyes as he spoke. He did not recite empty promises or political statements. Instead, he spoke of hope, of the possibility that 2 strangers from different worlds could learn to understand each other. He spoke of the children who would never have to know war, of the families that would remain whole, of the futures that would be possible because of this union. Lyran found herself listening, truly listening, and for a moment she forgot that this was supposed to be a sacrifice. The ceremony ended, and they were declared united. The crowd applauded politely, though the Valorian side seemed more relieved than happy. As they walked together toward their transport, Lyran noticed the way Daniel moved, smooth and balanced, like someone who was always aware of his surroundings. It was strange for someone who was supposed to be a simple diplomat. Their quarters on the transport ship were luxurious but awkward. Lyran stood by the window, watching the stars streak past as they entered faster than light travel. She did not know what to say to this human, this stranger who was now technically her husband. "You can have the sleeping chamber," Daniel said quietly. "I will sleep in the sitting area." Lyran turned to look at him. "That is not necessary," she said. "The chamber is large enough for both of us." Daniel shook his head with a small smile. "Peace should not begin with discomfort for either party," he said. "We are strangers, and there is no need to pretend otherwise. Trust is built slowly, and I am willing to wait." He took a blanket from the storage compartment and arranged it on the long couch in the sitting area. Within minutes, he was asleep, his breathing slow and even. Lyram watched him for a long moment, confused by what she had witnessed. The humans were supposed to be aggressive, impulsive, driven by base instincts. That was what she had been taught her entire life. But this man had given up his comfort without complaint, had spoken words of genuine hope, had treated her with a respect she had not expected. She retired to the sleeping chamber and lay in the darkness, her 4 eyes staring at the ceiling. Perhaps this marriage would not be as terrible as she had feared. Perhaps Daniel Carter was different from what she had been told about humans. Or perhaps he was simply better at hiding his true nature. Either way, Lyran decided that she would watch him carefully. She would learn everything she could about this strange human from the death world. And if he proved to be a threat to her people, she would deal with him herself, marriage or not. But as she drifted into sleep, she remembered the way he had looked at her during the vows, the sincerity in his brown eyes, the gentleness of his smile. And a small part of her, a part she refused to acknowledge, hoped that she was wrong about him. The journey to the Valorian homeworld would take 7 days, and in that time, Lyran would begin to learn that Daniel Carter was nothing like what she expected, and everything she never knew she needed. The Valorian homeworld was called Valoria Prime, and it was a world of towering crystal spires and floating gardens that drifted through the purple sky like dreams made solid. Lyran had grown up here, in the imperial palace that sat at the heart of the capital city, and she had always found comfort in its familiar halls. But now those halls felt different. Everywhere she walked with Daniel, she could feel the eyes of the court upon them. Nobles whispered behind their hands. Servants glanced away when they passed, and even the guards seemed to watch Daniel with barely hidden suspicion. The human was an outsider, a representative of a species that the Valorians had been taught to despise, and no marriage ceremony could change that overnight. Daniel never seemed to notice, or if he did, he never showed it. He walked through the palace with the same calm demeanor he had shown since the first day, smiling politely at everyone they met, asking questions about Valorian culture with what appeared to be genuine interest. "Why do you tolerate their rudeness?" Lyran asked him one evening as they walked through the palace gardens. Daniel paused to examine a flower that glowed with soft blue light. "What rudeness?" he asked. "You know what I mean," Lyran said. "They insult you constantly. Just this morning, Lord Varek called you a tailless beast within your hearing." Daniel nodded slowly. "Yes, he did," he said. "He also said it in the High Valorian dialect, which he assumed I could not understand." Lyran stared at him. "You speak High Valorian?" "I spent 3 years learning your language and culture before the marriage was arranged," Daniel said. "I wanted to understand the people I would be living among. It seemed like the respectful thing to do." This revelation shocked Lyran more than she wanted to admit. She had assumed Daniel was ignorant of the insults being thrown at him, but he had understood every cruel word. And yet he had never responded, never shown anger, never demanded satisfaction for the offense to his honor. "Why do you not defend yourself?" she asked. Daniel turned to face her, his brown eyes calm and thoughtful. "Words are just sounds," he said. "They only have power if I give them power. Lord Varek wants me to react, to prove that humans are the violent savages he believes us to be. If I lose my temper, I prove him right. But if I remain calm, if I continue to treat him with respect despite his hatred, Then perhaps one day he will begin to question what he believes. And if he never questions it? Daniel shrugged. Then I will have lost nothing but a few moments of peace, he said. But I will not have given him a reason to restart the war. Lyran had no response to this, so she simply walked beside him in silence. As the weeks passed, she began to observe Daniel more closely. She noticed that he woke before dawn each day to exercise in the private courtyard attached to their quarters. She watched from the window one morning and saw him moving through a series of combat forms, his body flowing from one position to the next with a precision that seemed impossible for someone supposedly untrained. She noticed that he read voraciously, consuming Valorian literature and philosophy at an incredible pace. He asked her questions about the books he read, thoughtful questions that showed he was not just reading the words, but truly trying to understand their meaning. She noticed that he treated everyone with the same respect, regardless of their station. He thanked servants by name, asked about their families, remembered small details about their lives. The palace staff began to speak well of him, though they did so quietly, afraid of being overheard by the nobles. One evening, a grand banquet was held in honor of a visiting delegation. Daniel and Lyran attended together, as was expected of them. The hall was filled with the most powerful nobles of the empire, all dressed in their finest robes, all eager to see how the human would embarrass himself. Consul Tharek Voss was the worst of them. He was young and ambitious, the son of a powerful military family, and he made no secret of his hatred for the Peace Alliance. Throughout the evening, he made comments about humans that grew increasingly cruel, each one designed to provoke a reaction. Finally, as the meal was served, Tharek stood and raised his glass. "I propose a toast," he announced loudly, "to the Peace Alliance and to the beast from the Death World, who has somehow convinced us that his primitive species is worthy of our attention." The hall fell silent. Every eye turned to Daniel, waiting for his response. Daniel stood slowly, his expression unchanged. He raised his own glass and smiled. "I thank the consul for his words," he said in perfect High Valorian, "and I offer my own toast in return. To peace, which requires more courage than war. To understanding, which is harder than hatred. And to the hope that one day we will judge each other not by the world we come from, but by the choices we make." He drank, and after a long moment, others began to drink as well. Tharek stood frozen, his face twisted with rage at having his insult turned into a moment of grace. Later that night, as they walked back to their quarters, Lyran looked at Daniel with new eyes. "That was well done," she said quietly. "It was nothing," Daniel replied. "It was not nothing," Lyran insisted. "You had every right to challenge him. By our laws, you could have demanded satisfaction for such an insult." Daniel stopped walking and turned to face her. "Wars have started over smaller insults," he said. "Your people and mine spent 40 years killing each other. How many families lost fathers and mothers and children? How many worlds burned? I will not be the reason that starts again, not over wounded pride." Lyran felt something shift inside her, something she did not have words for. This human, this strange quiet man from the Death World, had more honor than half the nobles in her father's court. "Who are you really, Daniel Carter?" she whispered. He smiled, but there was sadness in his eyes. "I am just a man who wants peace," he said. "Nothing more." But Lyran did not believe him, and she was beginning to realize that there was much more to her husband than he wanted anyone to know. 6 months had passed since the wedding, and Lyran had grown used to having Daniel in her life. She had not expected this, had not planned for it, but somehow the quiet human had become someone she looked forward to seeing each day. Their conversations had grown longer and deeper, touching on philosophy and art and the nature of existence. She had begun to see him not as a sacrifice she had made for peace, but as a true partner, But peace was fragile, and there were those who wished to see it shattered. High Commander Sareth Kane was the most decorated military leader in the Valorian Empire. He had spent 30 years fighting against the Confederation, had won countless battles, had built his entire identity around the glory of war. The peace treaty had taken everything from him, had made his skills worthless, had reduced him from a hero to a relic of the past. He would not accept this fate. Laren had always maintained a network of informants throughout the palace, servants and minor officials who reported to her about the movements and conversations of the court. It was through this network that she first heard the rumors. Sareth Kane was planning something that would destroy the Alliance and restart the war. She investigated carefully, quietly, using all the skills her mother had taught her before her death. And what she discovered filled her with horror. Sareth had arranged for a Valorian warship to attack a human cargo vessel. The attack would be made to look like the work of rogue elements, disgruntled soldiers acting without orders. But the evidence would point to official involvement, and the Confederation would demand justice. When the Empire refused to hand over the supposed criminals, tensions would escalate, and war would become inevitable. The attack had already happened. Lyron received word that the human cargo ship called the Morning Star had been destroyed 3 days ago, with all hands lost. The Confederation was already demanding answers, and her father was scrambling to investigate. Sareth had covered his tracks well, but Lyron had found enough evidence to prove his involvement. She rushed to find Daniel, her hearts pounding with fear and urgency. She found him in their quarters, reading a book of Valorian poetry, as if nothing was wrong. "Daniel, I need to tell you something," she said, her voice trembling. He looked up at her, and something in his eyes changed. The calm, gentle man she had come to know was still there, but behind that mask she saw something else, something sharp and dangerous. "I already know," he said quietly. Lyron froze. "You know? How?" Daniel set down his book and stood. "I have my own sources of information," he said. "I have known about Sareth Kane's conspiracy for 2 months. I have been watching, gathering evidence, waiting for the right moment to act." 2 months? Lyron felt a flash of anger. "Why did you not tell me? Why did you not warn someone? Those people on the Morning Star, they died because you waited." Daniel's expression was sad but firm. "If I had acted too soon, Sareth would have escaped justice," he said. "He would have destroyed the evidence and blamed someone else. The war would have started anyway, and more people would have died. I needed him to believe he had succeeded, needed him to become careless. And now, what will you do now?" Daniel walked to the window and looked out at the night sky. "Now I will end it," he said. "I will make sure Sareth Kane can never threaten the peace again." "How?" Lyron demanded. "He's surrounded by loyal soldiers. His fortress is impenetrable. Even my father's elite guards could not reach him without starting a civil war." Daniel turned to face her, and for the first time, Lyron saw the truth in his eyes. This was not a diplomat. This was not a simple man who wanted peace. This was something else entirely, something that made her breath catch in her throat. "Do you want peace to survive?" he asked. "Yes," she whispered. "More than anything." "Then trust me," Daniel said. "Stay here and wait for me to return." Before she could respond, he moved to the door. His movements were different now, fluid and purposeful, like a predator finally revealing its true nature. He paused at the threshold and looked back at her. "I will return before dawn," he said. "I promise." And then he was gone, disappearing into the shadows of the corridor like he had never been there at all. Lyron spent the night in agony, unable to sleep, unable to think of anything except Daniel. She paced their quarters, watched the stars wheel slowly overhead, and prayed to God she had stopped believing in years ago. 3 days passed with no word from him. Lyran told everyone that Daniel was ill, that he was resting in their quarters, but inside she was dying. Had he been captured? Had he been killed? Had she lost the one person who had made her believe that peace was possible? On the morning of the fourth day, news swept through the palace like wildfire. High Commander Sareth Kane had been found unconscious in his personal fortress. His elite guards, all 40 of them, had been incapacitated with surgical precision. Not one of them was dead, but all of them had been rendered helpless. And someone had transmitted classified documents to both the Valorian Emperor and the Confederation Council, documents that proved Sarath's involvement in the attack on the Morning Star. Sareth was arrested before noon. The war that had seemed inevitable was suddenly averted. The Confederation accepted the Emperor's apologies and agreed to continue the peace talks. That evening, Daniel walked into their quarters as if nothing had happened. He was dusty and tired, but unharmed. He sat down in his favorite chair and picked up his book of poetry. "Where have you been?" Lyran demanded. Daniel looked up at her with innocent eyes. "I went for a walk," he said. Lyran stared at him. This impossible human. This mystery wrapped in calm smiles and gentle words. She wanted to scream at him, to demand answers, to shake him until he told her the truth. Instead, she sat down across from him and said nothing. Some questions, she realized, were better left unasked. But she knew now that Daniel Carter was far more than he appeared, and she found that she was not afraid of what he might be. The exposure of Sareth Kane's conspiracy had saved the peace, but it had also created new enemies. The military faction that had supported Sareth was angry and humiliated, and they wanted revenge against the ones who had brought down their leader. Whispers spread through the shadows of the Empire, whispers of plots and plans, whispers of death. Lyran heard these whispers through her network of informants, and she grew afraid. Not for herself, but for Daniel. He had made powerful enemies, enemies who would not rest until he was dead. "You need to be careful," she told him one evening as they prepared for a state ceremony. "The conspirators who escaped arrest are planning something. They blame you for Sarath's fall." Daniel adjusted his formal jacket and smiled. "Let them plan," he said. "I have faced worse." "This is not a joke," Lyran said sharply. "They have hired the Keth Syndicate?" That made Daniel pause. The Keth were legendary assassins, feared throughout the galaxy. They had never failed a contract in 300 years of operation. Entire governments had fallen because someone angered them enough to hire the Keth. "Are you certain?" Daniel asked, his voice serious for the first time. "My sources are reliable," Lyran said. "They have sent 30 assassins." 30, Daniel? Even you cannot fight 30 Keth." Daniel was quiet for a long moment. Then he looked at her with eyes that held something she had never seen before. Concern, not for himself, but for her. "Stay close to me tonight," he said. "No matter what happens, stay close." The ceremony was held in the Grand Hall of the Imperial Palace, a vast chamber of crystal and gold where the most important events of the Empire took place. Hundreds of guests filled the hall, nobles and diplomats and military officers, all dressed in their finest clothes. Emperor Kalen Veth sat on his throne, watching the proceedings with tired eyes. Lyran stood beside Daniel near the center of the hall, her heart beating faster than normal. She scanned the crowd constantly, looking for anything out of place, any sign of danger. Daniel seemed calm, but she noticed that his body was positioned differently than usual, balanced and ready like a coiled spring waiting to release. The attack came without warning. The crystal windows shattered inward as dark figures dropped from the ceiling. Screams erupted throughout the hall as guests scrambled for cover. Guards drew their weapons but fell almost immediately, struck down by precise shots from weapons that made no sound. The Keth assassins moved through the chaos like shadows, their black armor absorbing light, their faces hidden behind featureless masks. They were heading directly for Daniel and Lyran, cutting down anyone who stood in their way. Lyran drew the ceremonial blade she always carried. It was supposed to be decorative, but she had trained with it since childhood. She would not die without a fight. "Stay behind me," Daniel said, his voice cold and focused. And then he moved. Lyran had watched Daniel practice his combat forms in the mornings, had admired his precision and grace. But what she had seen was nothing compared to this. He did not move like a man. He moved like water flowing through rock, like wind cutting through leaves, like something that existed outside the normal rules of physics. The first assassin reached them and struck with a blade that could cut through ship armor. Daniel sidestepped the attack by a margin so small it seemed impossible, his hand shooting out to strike the assassin's neck. The Keth collapsed instantly, unconscious before he hit the ground. Two more came at once, attacking from different angles. Daniel spun between them, his movements a blur, and both assassins fell in the span of a single heartbeat. Lyran watched in stunned amazement as her husband dismantled the most feared killers in the galaxy. He did not use weapons, did not need them. His body was the weapon, trained to a level of perfection that she had not known was possible. Every strike was precise, every movement efficient, and not a single motion was wasted. The assassins kept coming, and Daniel kept dropping them. 5, 10, 15, 20. They tried to overwhelm him with numbers, but he was always one step ahead, always in the exact position he needed to be. He turned their own attacks against them, used their momentum to throw them into each other, found the weak points in their armor with strikes that should have been impossible to aim. In less than 4 minutes, all 30 Keth assassins lay unconscious on the floor of the Grand Hall. Daniel stood in the center of the carnage, not even breathing hard. His formal jacket was torn in a few places, but he was completely unharmed. He looked around the hall, checking for any remaining threats, and then he turned to Lyran. "Are you all right?" he asked, his voice gentle again. Lyran could not speak. She could only stare at this man, this stranger she had married for the sake of peace, this impossible warrior who had hidden himself behind a mask of diplomacy and kindness. Emperor Kalen Veth descended from his throne, his expression a mixture of shock and something that might have been respect. "Who are you?" he demanded. "What are you?" Daniel bowed low. "I am Daniel Carter," he said, "a vanguard of Earth, sent to protect your daughter and the peace she sacrificed everything to achieve." The silence that followed was absolute. Later, in the privacy of their quarters, Lyran finally found her voice. "A vanguard," she said. "I have heard rumors of them. Soldiers trained from childhood in combat techniques that border on supernatural. The humans denied they existed. We do not advertise our existence," Daniel said. "We are guardians, not conquerors. Why did you hide this from me?" Daniel sat down heavily, and for the first time since she had known him, he looked tired. "Because true strength does not need to announce itself," he said. "I did not come here to intimidate your people with displays of power. I came to protect you and to give peace a chance to take root. If I had revealed what I was from the beginning, I would have been seen as a threat, not a partner." Lyran sat beside him and took his hand. "You are full of surprises, Daniel Carter." He smiled at her, the same gentle smile she had seen on the day of their wedding. "I hope some of them are good surprises," he said. Lyran thought about everything she had witnessed, everything she had learned, and she realized that she was not afraid of what Daniel was. She was grateful for it. "The best surprise," she said quietly, "was finding out that I married someone worth loving." The failed assassination had exposed a truth that shook the foundations of the galaxy. The Keth Syndicate did not act without payment, and the amount required to hire 30 of their assassins was beyond the means of any disgruntled Valorian faction. Someone with vast resources had funded the attack. Someone who wanted the Peace Alliance to fail. Daniel worked with Lyran and her network of informants to trace the payment. The trail led through dozens of shell accounts and false identities, but eventually they found the source, the Dominion of Shao. The Dominion was an empire that had grown rich and powerful by playing other civilizations against each other. For generations, they had manipulated the Valorian Confederation conflict, selling weapons to both sides, profiting from the endless war. The peace treaty threatened to destroy their most valuable source of income, and they had decided to take drastic action. "They have been behind everything," Lyran said as she studied the evidence. "The original tensions that started the war, the incidents that kept it going, even some of Sareth Kane's support. They have been puppeteers pulling strings from the shadows for decades. And now they are making their move," Daniel said grimly. 2 days later, a Dominion fleet appeared at the Valorian border. 5,000 warships, the largest armada seen in centuries, arranged in perfect formation. The Dominion High Admiral sent a simple message: surrender or be destroyed. Emperor Kalen Veth summoned his war council, but the situation was hopeless. The Valorian fleet had been reduced by the Long War, and even combined with Confederation forces, they could not match the Dominion's numbers. Surrender seemed to be the only option. Daniel requested permission to speak. "Let me negotiate with them," he said. "I will go to their flagship and deliver humanity's response." The Emperor stared at him. "You would go alone into the heart of the enemy fleet? That is suicide." "Perhaps," Daniel said. "But perhaps not. I ask only for a chance to try." Lyram wanted to object, wanted to forbid him from going, but she saw the determination in his eyes. She knew that he would go with or without permission, and she knew that there was more to his plan than simple negotiation. "Go," she said quietly, "but come back to me." Daniel smiled and kissed her forehead. "I promise," he said. A single shuttle carried Daniel across the void between the fleets. The Dominion watched it approach with amusement, this tiny vessel carrying a lone human who thought he could change their minds. The High Admiral, a cruel creature named Overlord Vrex, ordered the shuttle to dock with his flagship so he could personally witness the human's futile plea. Daniel walked through the corridors of the Dominion flagship with the same calm he had shown on his wedding day. Guards flanked him on every side, weapons pointed at his head, but he did not seem to notice. He moved like a man taking a casual stroll through a garden. The command bridge of the flagship was vast and dark, filled with Dominion officers monitoring their fleet. Overlord Vrex sat in an elevated throne at the center, his reptilian features twisted in a smile of contempt. "So this is humanity's ambassador," Vrex said mockingly. "I expected something more impressive. Your species has made quite a reputation for yourselves, but looking at you, I fail to see why." Daniel stood before the throne, his hands clasped behind his back. "I did not come to impress you," he said. "I came to deliver a message." "Then deliver it and be done," Rex laughed. "I have a war to fight." "The message is simple," Daniel said. "Humanity has been watching you for a long time. We know about your manipulations, your schemes, your centuries of playing civilizations against each other. We allowed it to continue because it served our purposes, because we were not ready to reveal ourselves. But that time is over." Rex leaned forward, his amusement fading. "What are you saying, human?" "I am saying that you have made a mistake," Daniel replied. "You assumed that humans were weak because we did not show our strength. You assumed that we were primitive because we did not display our technology. You assumed that we were few because we hid our numbers. All of these assumptions were wrong." At that moment, alarms began to sound throughout the flagship. Officers shouted in confusion as their sensors detected something impossible: ships decloaking behind the Dominion fleet. Not dozens of ships, not hundreds, but thousands. Human warships, sleek and deadly, materialized out of nothing. They were unlike anything the galaxy had ever seen, their designs incorporating technologies that should not have existed. In moments, the Dominion fleet found itself surrounded by a force twice its size. Rex stared at the tactical display in horror. "This is impossible," he whispered. "You could not have hidden a fleet this large." "We've been hiding it for 200 years, Daniel said. "Preparing, watching, waiting. Humanity never wanted war, but we always knew that someday we might need to fight. So we built ships in secret, trained soldiers in secret, developed weapons in secret. We hoped we would never need to use them. But you forced our hand." Daniel stepped closer to the throne, and for the first time, Rex saw the truth in the human's eyes. This was not a diplomat. This was a warrior who could have killed everyone on this bridge without breaking a sweat. "You have one chance," Daniel said. "Withdraw your fleet and never threaten the Valorian Empire or the Confederation again. Do this, and you will live. Refuse, and we will demonstrate why humanity is called a species of Deathworlders." Rex looked at the overwhelming force surrounding his fleet, at the calm humans standing before him, at the ruin of everything he had planned. His pride screamed at him to fight, but his survival instincts were stronger. "We withdraw," he said. The Dominion fleet retreated within the hour, and news of their defeat spread across the galaxy. The empire that had manipulated civilizations for centuries had been humbled by a single human and the hidden strength of his species. That night, Daniel returned to Valoria Prime, to the palace, to Lyran. She was waiting for him in their quarters, and when he walked through the door, she embraced him with all four arms. "You came back," she whispered. "I promised," he said. They stood together in the moonlight, the princess and the warrior, the sacrifice and the guardian. Lyran looked up at him and asked the question that had been burning in her heart. "Did you ever truly need me?" she asked. "Or was I always just part of a human strategy?" Daniel cupped her face in his hands and looked into her four eyes. "Humanity could have won any war," he said. "We had the power to destroy the Dominion centuries ago. But I volunteered for this marriage because I believed that peace was worth more than victory. I stayed because I found something I never expected." "What did you find?" "A partner," Daniel said. "Someone brave enough to sacrifice herself for peace, wise enough to seek the truth, and strong enough to stand beside me no matter what. I found someone worth protecting and someone worth loving." Lyran, princess of the Valorian Empire, had married a human for the sake of peace. And the human she married had unleashed unimaginable power, not to conquer, not to destroy, but to ensure that peace would endure forever. In the end, that was the greatest power of all.